Everyone assumes that whatever happens to your blood sugar while you're asleep is completely out of your hands, that the only thing standing between you and a high morning number is your medication and nothing else. I believed that for years. I was wrong, and I want to tell you exactly how I found out. I'm Frank. I'm 83. I still garden most mornings before the heat sets in. I drive myself wherever I need to go, and I keep a standing Sunday dinner with my daughter's family that I never once had to cancel because I felt too worn down to go. None of that was a given for me a decade back, and I used to think that once I closed my eyes at night, the outcome was already decided by my pancreas, my liver, my prescription, none of which I had any say over anymore. All I could do was take my pill and hope. That belief cost me a lot of frustration because it meant I'd stopped looking for anything else. I ate carefully. I took my metformin like clockwork, and my fasting number still sat in the 150s and 160s most mornings, refusing to budge, as if my effort during the day simply didn't count for anything once the sun went down. If you've ever done everything you were told and watched the number ignore you anyway, you know exactly the tired I mean. Not the tired of failure, the tired of trying honestly and getting nothing back you can point to. One woman told me, "I've done it all for years and I'm still diabetic." And I understood that sentence the moment I read it because I'd lived inside it myself. Underneath that tiredness was something else, quieter and harder to say out loud, a fear that my body had simply stopped responding to me, the way a phone stops ringing once people give up calling. That fear sat with me most mornings, right alongside the number on the meter. I tried adjusting other things first, hoping I wouldn't have to question the belief itself. I switched my medication timing slightly, with my doctor's approval. I tried a lower-carb dinner. I tried eating dinner even earlier some nights. Each change helped a little, or seemed to, but none of them touched the basic assumption I was working from, that whatever happened between bedtime and waking was simply out of reach, decided by biology I couldn't influence anymore. My doctor did what she could in the time she had, which wasn't much, 8 minutes, twice a year. Enough to check a box, not enough to explain what was actually happening to me overnight while I slept and had no say in the matter. So I went looking myself, and what I found upended the belief I'd been carrying for years. Here's what researchers who study aging and metabolism have documented. Your liver releases stored glucose overnight on its own schedule, mostly between the early morning hours, to keep your brain fueled until you wake. In a younger, more insulin-sensitive body, that release is modest and gets cleared quietly. But as insulin resistance builds, which tends to happen more with age, that release grows larger and clearing it slows down. It's called the dawn phenomenon, and it explained why my number climbed even on nights I hadn't eaten a thing after 6 o'clock. The sugar wasn't coming from dinner, it was coming from my own liver, hours after dinner was long finished. That was useful to know. But it still left me with the belief I opened with, that once I was asleep, there was nothing left to do about it. I assumed the liver's overnight schedule was simply fixed, like a tide, and the only lever left was medication. You do everything right. You eat clean, you take your pills, and the next morning that number is still too high. I know that frustration. I lived it for years. They never tell you about the morning rise, your sugar climbing while you sleep, no matter what you did the day before. You wake up, you test, and it feels like the work didn't count, like you're stuck depending on more and getting nowhere. I was done feeling powerless. I didn't want to throw out my doctor's plan. I wanted something natural and simple I could add to it, something that finally moved that morning number. I'll walk you through what changed it for me, and the natural support I add every day is in the free presentation linked below. That belief turned out to be flatly wrong, and the thing that proved it wrong to me was almost too small to take seriously at first. A 10-minute walk right after dinner before I sat down for the evening. Here's the mechanism researchers studying muscle physiology have documented, and it surprised me the first time I read it. When your muscles contract during movement, they pull glucose directly out of your bloodstream through a pathway that doesn't rely on insulin at all. Researchers call the transporter involved GLUT4, and physical activity opens it up almost like a second door for sugar to leave through, regardless of how resistant your body has become to insulin itself. That's the part that broke my old belief. I'd assumed insulin resistance meant the door was permanently jammed. It isn't. Movement opens a different door entirely. 10 minutes. Not a workout, not a program, a walk around the block or laps around the yard if the weather was bad. I did it after dinner, before the evening settled in, and within the first 2 weeks my numbers the next morning were noticeably steadier. Not perfect, steadier. Less of the wild 30-point swings I'd stopped being able to explain. But the walk alone wasn't the whole story, and I want to be honest about that instead of overselling 10 minutes of exercise as a miracle. What made the difference stick was pairing it with 2 other pieces. First, I moved my last real meal earlier, finishing by around 6:30 instead of 8, because researchers who study meal timing have observed that eating closer to bedtime is associated with worse overnight glucose control, likely because digestion and the processes of falling asleep are competing for the same resources. Second, I kept my bedroom cooler and dimmer in the hour before sleep, because research on sleep and glucose regulation has documented that poor, fragmented sleep raises cortisol, and elevated cortisol overnight pushes the liver toward releasing even more sugar, undoing exactly the ground the walk had gained. The walk opened the door. The earlier dinner and the better sleep kept it from slamming shut again by 2 a.m. There was a fourth detail I almost dismissed as superstition, but I've since seen it explained the same way by more than one source. I stopped drinking anything with caffeine after early afternoon. Caffeine has a longer half-life than most people assume, and researchers studying sleep quality have documented that afternoon and evening caffeine intake is associated with lighter, more fragmented sleep, even in people who don't feel like it's keeping them awake. Fragmented sleep, as I mentioned, feeds the same cortisol-driven glucose release the cooler bedroom was meant to calm down. Cutting caffeine off by early afternoon wasn't dramatic, but it removed one more thing working quietly against everything else I'd put in place. These days I take that same walk out of habit, not obligation. And some evenings I stretch it into 20 minutes just because the weather's decent and I've got nowhere else to be. I've got more energy in the evenings now than I had in my 70s, which still strikes me as backward, but there it is. I don't dread the walk. I look forward to it. I think of Miriam, 78, a retired postal worker who wrote to me after seeing an earlier version of this. Type 2 diabetic for over 16 years, on 2 medications, and, like me, she'd assumed the overnight number was simply out of her hands once she went to bed. She started with just the walk, 10 minutes most nights. 6 weeks in, she told me her mornings had gone from a coin flip to something she could actually predict. She wasn't cured, she wasn't off her medication, but she'd stopped believing the number was a closed door, and that belief change mattered to her as much as the number itself did. What struck me most about Miriam's story, and mine too if I'm honest, is how much of the struggle for years wasn't really about food or willpower at all. It was about a belief we'd both quietly accepted without ever testing it. Once she believed the overnight hours were open to influence instead of sealed shut, she started noticing other small windows she'd written off the same way. She moved her afternoon coffee earlier. She started leaving her phone in the other room after 9. None of it was dramatic. All of it came from the same shift, deciding the night wasn't finished deciding things just because she'd gone to sleep. If you watched this whole thing, you're not the type who gives up. You're the type who keeps looking for a real answer. So let me be straight with you. The morning number isn't your fault, and it isn't just diabetes. It's the dawn rise, and it responds to the right daily habits. The goal was never to quit your treatment. It was to support it naturally so you finally see that number move and feel in control again. Alongside the steps I showed you, I take a simple, natural support every day to help keep my blood sugar in a healthy range. Affordable, easy, and it works with my doctor's plan, not against it. The free presentation is in the description below. Go see it for yourself. And keep your doctor in the loop. This is support, not a replacement. I think about the people my age who found some peace with this, and the ones who kept struggling. And the difference was never who worked hardest during the daylight hours. It was who stopped believing the overnight hours were untouchable and started paying attention to the small window right after dinner, the 10 minutes that, it turns out, you had more say over than you'd ever been told. Always talk with your doctor before changing your routine or your medication. What I'm describing is meant to work alongside your treatment, never in place of it. If you've believed, like I did, that nothing can be done once you're asleep. Tell me in the comments whether this changes how you think about your evenings. And if you want to hear more about what actually kept my number steady through the night, subscribe. There's more of this story still to come.